I stood beside the coffin, my fingers trembling as I brushed the polished wood. My son Ethan was gone, and the silence in that church felt heavier than the grief in my chest. Everyone came to say their goodbyes, but their whispers echoed louder than the prayers. I kept hearing his voice in my head, the same words he repeated to me for years, sharp and unyielding. "Never go to the villa, Mom. Promise me. Never." He had said it with such force that I never dared to ask why. Even when he grew into a man, even when he became wealthy enough to buy a mansion by the sea, he never let me step foot inside. That place was his fortress, his secret. And now, staring at his lifeless body, I realized he had taken that secret with him to the grave, or so I thought. My name is Olivia. I am a mother, a widow, and now a woman left with nothing but questions. The grief in my heart was raw, but what came after shook me more than death itself. Remember to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below if you want to hear more. Grandma life stories filled with emotion, betrayal, and unexpected strength. After the service, while the crowd dispersed and condolences faded into murmurs, a man approached me. His black suit was immaculate, his shoes shined to perfection, and yet his eyes carried a weight I could not place. It was Richard, my son's lawyer. His voice was firm but gentle, like someone who had practiced this moment many times before. He held out a small velvet pouch and whispered, "Mrs. Olivia, Ethan wanted you to have this after his passing." I opened it with trembling hands and found a single ornate key. Alongside it, folded into crisp perfection, was the will. Richard cleared his throat. "The villa, valued at $15 million, now belongs to you. Ethan insisted it be transferred directly under your name." The air around me seemed to collapse. My son had left me a mansion I was never allowed to visit, a place he forbade me from even approaching. I clutched the key, my heart racing. Why would Ethan deny me entry all his life, only to hand me its ownership once he was gone? The question gnawed at me like fire eating through paper. I remember staring at that key, its silver edges gleaming under the dim light of the funeral hall. It wasn't just a key to a house, it felt like a key to a truth he had hidden. And in that moment, grief twisted into something else, an ache that begged for answers. I asked Richard if he knew why Ethan had been so protective. His reply was steady, rehearsed, but it did not satisfy me. He told me only that the villa was meant for you, and you alone. He left no further explanation. The words rattled around in my head. Meant for me? Then why forbid me from ever stepping inside? It made no sense. I folded the will back into the pouch, but my eyes kept drifting to the key. The weight of it pressed into my palm, like Ethan's hand urging me towards something. Driving home that night, the road blurred under my tears. I could still hear his laughter from when he was a boy, chasing waves on the beach, hair wild in the wind, and then the voice of the grown man he became, stern and guarded. "Never go to the villa, Mom." Those words used to sting. Now they haunted me, because they were gone, but the villa remained. At home, I placed the pouch on my nightstand, but sleep never came. My mind was at war. I thought of selling it immediately, erasing the burden of questions, turning a page without reading it. Yet deep inside, curiosity grew stronger with every hour. Why leave me something forbidden? Why a gift wrapped in silence? The walls of my room seemed to echo with Ethan's memory, and every shadow felt like it was pulling me toward the mystery he had left behind. The following morning, I returned to Richard's office. Papers were signed, and with a heavy hand, the property was officially mine. He handed me a folder with deeds, insurance documents, and the villa's history of ownership. All perfectly legal, all perfectly ordinary. But the ordinary did not comfort me. It frightened me more. Ordinary paperwork cannot explain extraordinary secrecy. On the way out, Richard paused. His voice lowered. "Mrs. Olivia, Ethan once told me, if she enters that place, she'll understand." That's all he said. I froze in the doorway, my breath caught in my chest. If I enter, I'll understand. Those words lingered like smoke, clouding everything. My son had not only left me a home, but a challenge, perhaps even a warning. That night, I drove to the villa's gates for the first time in my life. The iron bars loomed taller than I expected, black and menacing, vines curling around their edges like fingers ready to grab me. I sat in the car for what felt like hours, staring, gripping the key in my hand. My pulse pounded so loudly I could barely hear the cicadas buzzing in the dark. I stepped out and pressed the key into the heavy lock. It clicked smoothly, as though it had been waiting for me all along. The gate groaned open, revealing the shadowed path to the mansion. Its lights were dark, its windows like hollow eyes staring down at me. A shiver raced up my spine. For years, Ethan kept me away from this place, guarding it like a dragon guarding treasure. Now, it stood silent, abandoned, and yet alive with secrets. I whispered into the night, as if Ethan could still hear me. "Why, son? Why keep me away? What didn't you want me to see?" The wind rustled the trees, carrying no answer, only the smell of salt and earth. But in that silence I knew. Whatever waited inside would change everything I thought I knew about my son, my family, and myself. And I would no longer be the grieving mother who obeyed his warning. The first night after the funeral, I barely slept. The key rested on my nightstand, and I kept glancing at it as though it might move on its own. My mind circled around the same thought again and again. I should just sell the villa, sign the papers, hand it over to an agency, and never look back. That was the practical choice, the safe choice. Yet every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ethan's face, young and serious, his voice echoing in my ears. "Never go to the villa, Mom." It had always been a command, but now it felt like a riddle, daring me to disobey. Morning sunlight streamed through my curtains, sharp and unforgiving. I made myself coffee, but the taste was bitter and empty. The house was too quiet, too hollow. I wandered through rooms that once echoed with Ethan's laughter, back when he was just a boy, chasing our old dog through the halls. Now every corner reminded me of absence. Selling the villa would mean burying his memory further. But going there meant facing the secret he had hidden so fiercely. I pulled out the documents Richard had given me. The will was neatly typed, every word carefully placed. The villa was mine without question. Ethan had even left instructions for the taxes and upkeep, as though he knew I would hesitate. At the bottom of the packet, tucked into a smaller envelope, was something I hadn't noticed before. My heart thudded as I opened it. Inside was a letter, handwritten in Ethan's familiar script. My fingers shook as I unfolded the pages. His handwriting was strong but rushed, like the words were heavy and he had to release them quickly. I began to read aloud, because hearing his voice in my imagination steadied me. "Mom, if you are reading this, it means I am gone. I know I never let you inside the villa. I know it hurt you, even if you never said it. Please believe me, it was not because I didn't trust you. It was because I wanted to protect you. That house carries truths that could shatter you, and I could not bear to see you face them while I lived. But if you hold this letter now, then the time has come. If you enter the villa, you'll understand why I kept you away. If you choose not to, then burn this letter, sell the house, and never look back. But if you go in, be prepared. Nothing will ever be the same." I pressed the paper to my chest, my breath shallow. Protect me? From what? What kind of son hides an entire life from his mother, only to drop it into her lap when he's gone? Anger rose in me, mingling with grief. I wanted to scream at him for leaving me with riddles instead of answers. But underneath the anger was something else. Fear. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the letter, the key beside it gleaming in the morning light. The choice lay before me in its simplest form. Sell it and never know, or enter and discover the truth, no matter how much it hurt. I thought of Ethan's last smile, faint but sincere, the week before his heart gave out. He had looked at me as if he carried a burden too heavy for words, and now, through ink and paper, he was asking me to carry it for him. The days that followed blurred together. Neighbors stopped by with casseroles and condolences. Friends called to check on me. They all spoke in soft tones, but I barely heard them. My mind was locked on the letter. I tucked it into my purse, carried it everywhere, as though the words would fade if I let them out of sight. At night, I read it again and again, each time searching for hidden meaning between the lines. Finally, one evening, I couldn't resist. I drove back to the villa gates. The iron bars loomed as before, but this time I stepped out of the car with purpose. The key was warm in my palm, as if it had absorbed the heat of my doubts. I walked up to the lock, but something stopped me. I pulled out the letter and read the final line again. "If you go in, be prepared. Nothing will ever be the same." The words made my stomach knot. I wasn't ready, not yet. I turned back to the car, clutching the letter as though it were a lifeline. I promised myself I would return when my heart was steadier. For now, the questions had to simmer until I had the courage to face them. Back home, I spread the documents on the table again. Amid the contracts and receipts, one thing stood out: a receipt for repairs to a locked room in the villa, signed only a few months before Ethan's death. I stared at it, my curiosity burning hotter. Why repair a room and never mention it? Why leave the receipt with the will? It was as though he wanted me to find it. Sleep abandoned me that night. My dreams were filled with whispers and shadows, with Ethan's voice urging me forward. By morning, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. The villa wasn't just a house. It was a message, and Ethan had left me the key to read it. I packed a small bag, placed the letter inside, and drove back to the iron gates as the sun dipped low on the horizon. This time, I didn't hesitate. I slid the key into the lock, felt it turn, and pushed the gate open. The path stretched before me, lined with hedges that swayed in the evening wind. I walked slowly, each step heavier than the last, until the villa stood before me, tall and silent, daring me to enter. I whispered to myself, "Ethan, I'm ready. Show me what you hid." My hand tightened around the letter, and I stepped forward into the unknown. The gates closed behind me with a metallic groan that echoed in the still air. For a moment I just stood there, frozen on the gravel path, the villa towering above me. Its white stone walls gleamed faintly under the fading sun, and ivy climbed up the sides like veins on old skin. The windows were dark, watching me with a lifeless stare, and I felt as if I were trespassing into my own inheritance. The silence pressed in on me, broken only by the crunch of gravel under my shoes as I forced myself to walk forward. I had imagined this place 1,000 times over the years. I pictured bright gardens, open windows, maybe even the sound of laughter carried on the breeze. But what stretched before me was something else entirely. The lawn was overgrown in patches, the hedges trimmed but uneven, as though someone had tried to keep up appearances while slowly giving in to neglect. The fountain in the courtyard was dry, its stone angels cracked, their faces weathered into grimaces. My chest tightened as I realized how little I knew about my son's life, even as he lived only miles away. The front door loomed ahead, carved oak with iron handles that felt cold even in the warm evening. I inserted the key and turned it, my breath shallow. The lock clicked with ease, and the door swung open, releasing a gust of stale air, heavy with dust and something faintly metallic. I stepped inside, clutching the strap of my bag as though it could shield me from whatever secrets lay within. The entry hall was vast, more like a cathedral than a home. Marble floors stretched out before me, and a grand staircase curved upward with a red carpet worn at the center. Chandeliers hung above, their crystals dull from neglect, but still catching faint glimmers of light. Family portraits lined the walls, but none of them showed Ethan. Instead, strangers stared back at me, their faces stern, their eyes following me as if I had no right to be there. "Mrs. Olivia?" A voice startled me from the shadows, soft but cautious. I turned sharply, my heart racing, and saw a woman standing near the dining room archway. She wore a neat black dress and an apron, her hands folded in front of her. Her hair was pulled tightly into a bun, and her eyes flickered between me and the floor. "I'm Ms. Duarte," she said, her accent gentle but her tone guarded. "I looked after the house for Mr. Ethan." I swallowed, trying to find steadiness in my voice. "You must have known him well." She nodded but did not meet my gaze. "He was private. Very private. He gave orders. I followed them. There was something in her tone that unsettled me, as though she carried knowledge but feared to speak it. I wanted to press her, but my eyes wandered past her into the dining room. The long oak table was set with crystal glasses and fine china, but every surface was coated in dust. The chairs stood neatly aligned, waiting for a family that never gathered. I moved deeper into the house, my footsteps echoing. Each room told me something about Ethan's life, but not enough to satisfy the growing hunger for answers. The library was filled with heavy leather-bound books, many untouched, while a few lay open as if abandoned mid-thought. The study smelled of old ink and faint smoke, papers stacked high on the desk, though most were blank sheets. The kitchen was spotless, almost too spotless, like it had been scrubbed clean of any sign of living. Ms. Duarte followed at a respectful distance, her silence speaking louder than words. When I asked about Ethan's habits, she gave short replies. He worked late. He kept to himself. He didn't like visitors. Each answer only deepened my unease. Upstairs, I wandered through bedrooms, each meticulously prepared but seemingly unused. The master bedroom was grand but cold, the bed made tightly, no imprint of a body that had once slept there. I brushed my fingers along the dresser and noticed a faint layer of dust. This wasn't a home. It was a stage set, a shell. Then, at the end of the hallway, I noticed a door unlike the others. Heavy steel, painted to match the wood around it, with a lock that didn't belong in a house, but in a bank vault. I felt the hair on my arms rise as I approached it. I pulled out the key, tried to fit it into the lock, but it didn't budge. My breath quickened as I tugged harder, but the key refused to turn. Behind that door, something waited. I didn't need Ethan's letter to know it. Every instinct screamed that this was what he had hidden from me. The villa wasn't just a house of wealth. It was a fortress, and that door was its heart. I turned to Ms. Duarte. "What's behind this room?" Her eyes widened just for a moment before she dropped her gaze to the floor. "I don't know. Mr. Ethan never let anyone inside." Her voice trembled slightly, betraying her. I stepped closer, studying her face. She clutched her apron tighter, as though afraid of what she might reveal. "He kept the key himself," she added quickly. "No one else had it." My hand pressed against the cold steel of the door, and a chill seeped into my skin. Locked rooms always hold the heaviest secrets. I could almost hear Ethan's voice whispering in the silence, warning me away, urging me forward all at once. I walked back down the hall, my mind racing. Every corner of the villa whispered of hidden truths, and that locked room screamed the loudest. I knew I would not rest until I opened it. As I descended the staircase, I noticed Ms. Duarte watching me carefully, her lips pressed thin, her eyes flickering with something she tried to bury. Was it fear, guilt, or loyalty to my son? I couldn't tell, but I knew this house was alive with secrets, and every shadow seemed to breathe them. Standing once more in the grand hall, I whispered to myself, "Ethan, what were you protecting me from?" The chandelier above swayed slightly, as if the house itself had heard me. The next morning I returned to the villa with a sharper resolve. The air smelled faintly of sea salt and polished stone as I pushed open the heavy front doors. Sunlight spilled through the tall windows, but it did little to chase away the unease that clung to the place. I had barely taken 3 steps into the grand hall when the sound of tires on gravel reached my ears. My pulse quickened. Someone else was here. Through the glass panels, I saw a sleek black car glide to a stop outside the gates. Then another. Doors opened with practiced precision, and soon I saw them. My cousins, the people I hadn't spoken to in years. Marcus emerged first, tall and imposing in a perfectly tailored suit. His hair was silver at the temples, his jaw sharp, his eyes cold as steel. He carried himself like a king entering a kingdom, even though the deed now bore my name. Simon followed close behind, carrying a leather briefcase, his glasses catching the light. His expression was smooth, almost oily, the kind of look that made you want to wipe it clean. And behind them, Clara stepped out, her smile polished, but her eyes calculating. She wore pearls that gleamed against her dark dress, a performance of grace masking something sharper underneath. I felt my chest tighten. I hadn't invited them. Yet here they were, striding up the path as though they owned the place. I turned toward the doorway, planting myself in the center of the hall. When the heavy doors opened again, their presence filled the space, thick and suffocating. "Olivia," Marcus said, his voice deep, each syllable weighted with false courtesy. He didn't wait for me to reply. Instead, his gaze swept over the marble floor, the staircase, the walls, before returning to me. "So, you finally set foot inside." I folded my arms across my chest. "This is my home now. Ethan left it to me." Simon adjusted his glasses, his lips curling into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Yes, about that. There are certain legal complications we should discuss. Ethan was family. Family assets don't simply belong to one person." Clara stepped forward, her heels clicking against the marble. "We only came to make sure things are handled properly," she said, her voice smooth as silk. But then she leaned in slightly, lowering her tone. "After all, Olivia, we wouldn't want you to feel overwhelmed with all this responsibility." Her words dripped with condescension, and something inside me burned. I straightened my shoulders. "I don't feel overwhelmed. Ethan was clear. The villa is mine." Marcus's expression darkened, the mask of politeness slipping just enough to reveal the tension beneath. His jaw clenched and his hand curled into a fist before he forced it open again. "You always were stubborn," he muttered. Then louder, "But don't fool yourself. This place, it was never really Ethan's." "Do you even know what's underneath it?" The question hung in the air like smoke, suffocating and heavy. My breath caught. Underneath it? My mind flashed back to the locked steel door upstairs, the one even Ms. Duarte had avoided speaking of. I tried to steady my voice. "What do you mean?" Simon smirked, tapping his briefcase. "All in good time, but first we need to establish our share. Ethan may have left you the house, but assets of this size rarely remain uncontested. Courts can be messy, and you don't want that, do you?" Clara tilted her head, her smile widening, but her eyes darted briefly toward Marcus. A flicker of unease, quickly hidden. She was here to play both sides, I realized, to smile at me, to echo Marcus, and yet to watch for her own opportunity. I stood my ground, though my hands trembled behind my back. "You can threaten me with papers and courts all you like. Ethan made his wishes clear." Marcus stepped closer, towering over me. His cologne was sharp, his presence overwhelming. For a moment, I saw not just arrogance, but fear lurking deep in his eyes. He was desperate, though he tried to bury it under power. "Ethan was weak," he spat. "He let himself be crushed by responsibilities he didn't understand. And now you think you can take his place? You?" The words cut, but they also revealed something he hadn't intended. Weak. Responsibilities. Crushed. This wasn't just about money or property. This was about a fight Ethan had waged, and Marcus had lost once before. His obsession now was to rewrite that failure through me. Ms. Duarte appeared at the edge of the hall, her hands twisting nervously in her apron. She looked at me, then at Marcus, then quickly looked away. I saw it then, the fear that had kept her silent, the tension that lived in these walls even when Ethan was alive. Clara's voice broke the moment. "Perhaps we should sit down, like civilized people, discuss terms." She gestured towards the dining room, but I shook my head. "No, this is not a negotiation. If you came to intimidate me, you've wasted your time." Marcus's lips curved into a thin smile, but his eyes glinted with anger. "We'll see about that. The truth always comes out, Olivia, and when it does, you may wish you had listened to me today." They turned as abruptly as they had arrived, their footsteps echoing down the hall. When the doors slammed shut behind them, the silence that followed was louder than any threat. My knees felt weak, but I refused to collapse. I held onto the banister, steadying myself. Their words weren't just warnings, they were clues. Something hidden lay within these walls, something Ethan had fought to protect, and now they were circling, waiting for me to stumble. I whispered into the emptiness, "Ethan, what did you hide from them?" And from me, only the faint creak of the chandelier above, swaying as if the house itself had heard the storm brewing inside its walls. The villa was quiet again after Marcus, Simon, and Clara left, but their presence still lingered like smoke in my lungs. I sat in the grand hall for a long time, staring up at the chandeliers, trying to gather myself. My hands were still trembling, though I told myself I wasn't afraid. The truth was, I was both, afraid and determined. Their words replayed in my head. "Do you even know what's underneath it?" Marcus had said. That question rattled inside me like a stone in a jar. The next morning, I rose before dawn. Sleep was a stranger now. I wandered the halls of the villa, room by room, looking for anything that might help me understand. The stillness was heavy, but in certain corners, I felt a pulse, as if the house itself was waiting for me to uncover its heart. Dust motes floated in the air, catching faint rays of sunlight as I entered Ethan's study. It was the only room that felt touched, lived in, even if faintly. Stacks of paper cluttered the desk, some blank, some scribbled with notes. There were maps rolled up and shoved into corners. But what caught my eye was a laptop, sleek but scratched on the edges, sitting at the far end of the desk. It looked ordinary, but I knew nothing in this house could be ordinary. My hands shook as I pressed the power button. The screen lit up. The background was plain black, no distractions, no decoration. A password box appeared. My stomach twisted. I had no idea what Ethan's password might be. I tried his birthday, my birthday, even the name of our old dog. Nothing. Then, as if whispered by memory, I recalled the last word he ever said to me, his voice faint in the hospital bed. "Truth?" I typed it in. The screen unlocked. There were only a few folders, each labeled simply, contracts, photos, records. But one folder stood apart, named For Mom. My breath caught. My fingers hovered over the trackpad before I finally clicked. Inside was a single video file. I opened it, and there he was, my son, alive, though pale and thinner than I remembered. His hair was messy, his eyes ringed with fatigue, but his voice was steady. "Mom, if you're watching this, it means I didn't make it. I need you to hear the truth, because the people around us will twist it, and you're the only one I trust." I clutched the edge of the desk, my throat tight. He paused in the video, as if choosing words carefully. "You know I had heart problems, but what you don't know is that Marcus and Simon once took everything from me. Years ago, they tricked me into signing over land rights. They tried to bury me in debt. I fought back, and I bought it all back piece by piece, but they never forgave me. They've been circling ever since, waiting for me to fall." He leaned closer to the camera. His eyes, so much like mine, burned with urgency. "The villa isn't just a house. It sits on top of something more, something valuable, something that could change everything for our family. That's why I never let you come here. Not because I didn't love you, but because I knew they would stop at nothing if they thought you knew. I thought I could protect you by keeping you away. But if you're watching this, then it's your fight now." My breath came in short gasps. My son had carried this secret alone, shielding me from enemies I hadn't even realized were circling. Tears blurred my eyes, but I forced myself to watch every second. He held up a folder in the video, tapping it. "I left files in this house, proof of what Marcus and Simon did, and proof of what lies beneath the villa. If you find it, you can stop them, but be careful. They'll come for you the moment they know you've seen this." The screen went black. I sat frozen, the silence deafening after his voice faded. The laptop fan hummed softly, the only sound in the room. My heart pounded so loudly it seemed to echo off the walls. Proof. Files. Something beneath the villa. Ethan had known he was dying, and instead of letting me grieve in peace, he had passed me his unfinished battle. A rush of emotions swirled inside me, anger that he hadn't trusted me sooner, sorrow that he carried such a heavy burden, fear of what Marcus and Simon were capable of. But stronger than all of it was resolve. He trusted me now. In death, he had given me the truth he had once withheld, and I could not betray that trust. I closed the laptop gently, almost reverently, and pressed my hand against the lid. "I'll find it, Ethan. Whatever you left behind, I'll find it. I promise." A floorboard creaked behind me. I turned quickly, my heart racing, but it was only Miss Duarte standing in the doorway. Her hands were clasped tightly in front of her, and her face was unreadable. "You should be careful, Mrs. Olivia," she said softly. "Some doors in this house are better left closed." Her words sent a chill through me. Did she know what was behind that locked steel door upstairs? Did she know about the files Ethan had hidden? I studied her carefully, but she lowered her gaze and disappeared down the hallway before I could ask. Left alone, I opened the laptop again and replayed Ethan's video. Each word etched deeper into my heart, each pause filling me with more questions. Proof, files, hidden in the villa. I had to find them. And for the first time since Ethan's death, I felt something stronger than grief. I felt purpose. The days after discovering Ethan's video blurred together, yet every detail of his words echoed inside me. Proof, files, something hidden beneath the villa. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw his face on the screen, his tired but determined eyes urging me forward. But I also saw Marcus's cold stare, Simon's smug smile, and Clara's calculated charm. They weren't going to let me breathe in peace. If Ethan was right, they would be circling, waiting for me to falter. On the third morning, I decided I could no longer confine myself to the villa's walls. I needed air, perspective, and maybe even help. I walked down the long gravel drive, past the iron gates, and onto the coastal road that wound along the cliffs. The sea spread wide before me, endless and restless, waves crashing against the rocks far below. For a brief moment, it reminded me that the world was bigger than secrets and betrayals. That was when I noticed the house next door, if you could call it that. It was more modest than Ethan's villa, but still impressive, built in a modern style with clean lines and wide glass windows that overlooked the ocean. In the driveway stood a man, tall, broad-shouldered, with oil stains on his shirt, and hands that looked used to hard work. He was bent over the hood of an old truck, humming to himself, until he noticed me. "Morning," he called, straightening. His voice carried warmth, edged with curiosity. I hesitated but forced a polite nod. "Good morning." He wiped his hands on a rag, studying me with cautious eyes. "You must be Mrs. Olivia, Ethan's mother." The mention of my son's name hit me like a blow, but I steadied myself. "Yes, I just moved into the villa." He gave a slow nod, his expression softening. "Name's Julian. I worked with Ethan years back. Oil engineering, land surveys, that sort of thing. We lost touch when he got busier, but I knew he lived over there. Never expected to see you at the gates, though." "Oil engineering?" My pulse quickened. The video Ethan had left me suddenly aligned with this stranger's introduction. I studied him carefully, wondering if fate had placed him in my path. Julian must have read the question in my eyes, because he offered a small smile. I know Ethan kept to himself. He was private, but he and I shared a few long nights talking shop, about what lies under these cliffs, about what could be tapped if handled right. He always said he was sitting on something bigger than himself. He just didn't trust many people with it. My throat tightened. "And did he trust you?" Julian shrugged, his smile fading. "Enough to talk, not enough to let me in completely, but I figured he was protecting someone, maybe you." The way he said it made my skin prickle. Protecting me. Always protecting me. Even in secrecy, Ethan's choices circled back to me. Julian leaned against his truck, his rag still twisting in his hands. "Look, I don't mean to intrude, but I can tell you this much. The land your villa sits on is rich, not just in money, but in leverage. If the wrong hands get hold of it, they won't stop until they bleed it dry. Ethan knew that. He was stubborn, but he wasn't stupid." I met his gaze, searching for deception. All I saw was concern, and maybe a touch of guilt. Still, caution whispered in my ear. Allies didn't come easily in this world. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. He sighed, glancing toward the villa. Because I saw the cars at your gates 2 days ago. Marcus, Simon, Clara. I know who they are, and I know what they've done before. If they're circling again, it means Ethan left something worth fighting for. I don't want to see you crushed in the middle of their game." His words rang true, yet trust was not something I could hand over lightly. I thought of Ms. Duarte's evasive answers, the locked steel door upstairs, the video Ethan left. Secrets lay in every corner, and even those who wanted to help might have their own stakes. Still, I nodded. "I appreciate your honesty, Julian, but I have to be careful. I can't trust anyone blindly." A faint smile tugged at his lips. "Good." Ethan would have said the same. I turned back toward the villa, the weight of the key heavy in my pocket, the letter heavier still in my purse. My steps slowed as I reached the gates again. Julian's words lingered, unsettling but grounding. Oil, land, leverage, proof. Each piece circled closer to the truth Ethan wanted me to find. As I walked through the grand hall once more, Ms. Duarte appeared silently from the dining room, her expression guarded. "You spoke to the neighbor," she said, not as a question, but as a statement. "Yes," I answered carefully. She pursed her lips, her eyes unreadable. "Be cautious, Mrs. Olivia. Neighbors see much, sometimes too much." Her warning only deepened the puzzle. Was she protecting me or protecting herself? That night, I returned to the study, reopening the laptop. Ethan's video replayed, his tired eyes burning through the screen. "If you find it, you can stop them." His voice filled the silent house, and for the first time, I knew I was not just stumbling through grief. I was standing on a battlefield disguised as a home, and every person around me, Marcus, Simon, Clara, Duarte, even Julian, was a piece on the board. I closed the laptop, whispering into the dark, "Ethan, I will find it, and I won't let them win." The villa had become a maze of questions, and each hallway seemed to whisper Ethan's name. Days stretched into nights, and still the locked steel door upstairs gnawed at me. It wasn't just another room. It was the heart of everything. The video on Ethan's laptop, Julian's quiet warnings, Marcus's taunts, all pointed toward what lay behind that barrier. I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. I began searching with a new intensity. Drawers, shelves, hidden compartments in desks and dressers. I tore through them all. The housekeeper, Ms. Duarte, watched me from a distance. Her lips pressed thin, as if she wanted to intervene but didn't dare. I felt her eyes on me, sharp and nervous, but she said nothing. Every discovery was ordinary, too ordinary. Bills, receipts, magazines, long out of date. Yet I refused to believe Ethan had built his fortress on dust. On the fourth night, I returned to Ethan's study. The desk lamp cast a yellow glow across the wood, highlighting scratches where he must have tapped impatient fingers. My gaze lingered on the bottom drawer, the only one that resisted when I tried it earlier. This time I pulled harder. With a loud snap, the lock gave way. Inside, beneath piles of blank paper, I found a small metal box. My breath caught as I lifted it out. The box was heavy and cold, etched with faint marks along its edges. I pressed the latch. It opened with a groan, revealing a single brass key. Different from the ornate silver one Richard had given me, this one was plain, utilitarian, built for strength, not beauty. I knew instantly what it was for. Clutching the key, I climbed the staircase, my footsteps echoing in the hollow hall. At the end of the corridor, the steel door loomed, darker than the rest of the house, its surface dull and cold. I inserted the brass key. My hands trembled, my pulse hammering. With a reluctant click, the lock turned. The door opened inward, groaning like it hadn't moved in years. The room beyond was not a bedroom, not a storage space. It was a war room. Maps covered the walls, maps of the land, geological surveys, diagrams marked with red ink. Desks lined the space, piled high with folders. There was a projector, a safe, and an old video camera set up in the corner. On one wall, pinned above the rest, was a blueprint of the villa itself, with a section circled in bold red beneath the foundation. My knees weakened. This was what Ethan had hidden, the fortress of his truth. I stepped inside, closing the door gently behind me. Dust coated the air, but beneath it lingered the faint smell of ink and paper, of work done in desperation. I approached the nearest desk, pulling open a folder. Inside were bank statements, contracts, and letters, all stamped with Marcus's company logo. Some had red markings, notes in Ethan's handwriting pointing out discrepancies. Words like fraud, embezzlement, and illegal transfer leapt from the page. My son had been documenting every crooked move Marcus and Simon had made. With shaking hands, I opened another folder. This one held photographs. Grainy shots of Marcus meeting with businessmen, Simon passing envelopes, Clara shaking hands with strangers. Proof, tangible and damning. Ethan had gathered it all. A lump formed in my throat. He hadn't just fought for himself. He had fought for me, for our family name, for something bigger than money. And he had done it alone, carrying this weight while I remained in the dark. Tears blurred my vision, but I forced myself onward. I turned to the projector and pressed the power button. The bulb flickered weakly before humming to life. A video filled the wall. Ethan's face appeared again, this time sterner, more deliberate. His eyes burned with a fire I hadn't seen in years. "Mom," he began, his voice steady, "if you've made it this far, then you've found what I was hiding. You know now that Marcus and Simon are not just greedy, they are dangerous. They bled companies dry, bribed officials, and nearly destroyed me. But I couldn't let them destroy what lies beneath this villa." He lifted a rolled map into the frame, spreading it out. Geological charts filled the screen, with sections circled in red. "There are oil reserves under this land, Mom. Enough to change fortunes, enough to tempt men like Marcus into burning everything in their path. I wanted to protect it until the right time. I wanted to protect you." My heart pounded. Oil. It explained Julian's words, Marcus's obsession, Ethan's secrecy. This wasn't just about inheritance. It was about power that could topple families, maybe even corporations. Ethan's voice lowered, almost breaking. "They will come for you now, Mom. They will lie, cheat, and threaten. But don't be afraid. You have the evidence. You have the truth. If you hold your ground, they cannot break you. Remember, you are stronger than you think, stronger than even I was." The video ended abruptly, the screen fading to black. I sank into a chair, clutching my chest. My son, even in death, was guiding me, pushing me toward a battle I never asked for, but could no longer avoid. A faint sound behind me made me spin. The door creaked, and there stood Ms. Duarte. Her eyes widened at the sight of the war room, the papers scattered around me, the projector still humming. She froze, her hands gripping the frame of the door. "You found it," she whispered, her voice trembling. I narrowed my eyes. "You knew." Her lips parted, but no words came. She stepped inside slowly, glancing at the maps, the photos, the documents. "I saw him working here sometimes. He told me never to speak of it. He said if anyone asked, I should deny everything. I did what he asked." Her face was pale, her hands shaking. For the first time, she looked less like a servant bound by duty and more like a woman caught in a web too large to escape. I rose from the chair, steadying my breath. "If you knew, why didn't you warn me?" Tears welled in her eyes. "Because Clara paid me. She offered money for silence, for scraps of information. I took it, but I never betrayed him fully. I swear it. I was afraid, Mrs. Olivia. Afraid of them, afraid of losing everything." Her confession struck like a blow. Betrayal, even if partial, even if born of fear. Yet her trembling voice also carried sincerity. She was human, torn between survival and loyalty. I looked around the room again, at Ethan's maps and notes, at the evidence stacked like weapons waiting to be drawn. This was more than I had imagined, heavier than I could carry alone. But I had no choice. Ethan had trusted me to bear it, and now the fight was mine. I pressed my hand against the blueprint of the villa, tracing the red circle beneath its foundations. "Ethan," I whispered, "I will not let them bury your truth." Miss Duarte's gaze followed mine, and I saw fear flicker again in her eyes. But beneath it, perhaps, a spark of something else. Maybe she too was realizing there was no turning back. The villa had revealed its heart, and with it, my path was clear. I was no longer just a grieving mother stumbling through grief. I was standing in the middle of a storm Ethan had prepared for, and now it was my turn to finish what he started. I had been living in the villa for nearly 2 weeks when I realized I could no longer fight this battle in isolation. Ethan's war room had given me strength, but it had also revealed the scale of the fight ahead. Marcus and Simon were already circling like vultures, and Clara, with her honeyed words, would surely strike when it suited her. I needed someone who could be swayed, someone who might stand with me instead of against me. That was when I thought of Sophia, Marcus's daughter. Sophia had always been polite in family gatherings, though quiet. She inherited her father's sharp cheekbones, but not his icy eyes. Hers carried something softer, something conflicted. At Ethan's funeral, she had stood apart from the others, her gaze lowered, her expression unreadable. I remembered how she had clasped my hand briefly, as though wanting to say something but too afraid. That hesitation lingered in my mind, and I decided to test whether she could be more than her father's shadow. I sent her a letter, written in careful words, inviting her to dinner at the villa. A private dinner, just the two of us. I asked her to come without her father, without her uncle, without Clara. Days later, a reply arrived in neat handwriting. Yes, Aunt Olivia, I'll come. The night of the dinner, I prepared carefully. The dining hall, though vast and cold, glowed with candlelight. I polished the silverware Ethan had never used, arranged fresh flowers from the garden, and opened a bottle of wine he once kept in the cellar. I wanted the evening to feel disarming, safe. Perhaps if Sophia saw me not as an adversary, but as family, she might listen. When the doorbell rang, I took a steadying breath and opened it. Sophia stood there, draped in a pale blue dress, her long hair pinned back neatly. She smiled faintly, though her eyes darted nervously around the hall as I welcomed her inside. "Aunt Olivia," she said softly, "thank you for inviting me." "I'm glad you came," I replied, taking her coat. "We haven't had time to talk in years. Tonight is just for us." We sat across from one another at the long table, plates of roasted chicken and vegetables between us. At first, our conversation was light, almost awkward. She asked about my health, about the villa, about how I was managing. I asked about her studies, her interests, her future. Slowly the ice melted, and a flicker of warmth returned. For a moment, I believed this dinner could bridge the chasm between us. Halfway through the meal, I leaned forward, lowering my voice. "Sophia, I know your father has strong opinions about me, about this house, but I need you to understand something. Ethan left it to me for a reason. He trusted me to protect it, and not just for myself, for the whole family." Her fork paused mid-air. She looked at me, her lips parting slightly. "Protect it? From what?" I hesitated, then spoke carefully. "From greed. From lies. From those who would tear it apart for their own gain." Her eyes darkened, and for a moment I thought I saw recognition. She glanced down at her plate, then back at me, her voice soft. "My father says you're being manipulated, that you don't understand what Ethan was hiding." I shook my head. "I understand enough. More than he thinks." Sophia's gaze flickered again, this time toward her handbag resting on the chair beside her. It was a small movement, but it pierced me with sudden clarity. Something wasn't right. I leaned back, my heart tightening. "Sophia," I said slowly, "why did you really come tonight?" She froze, her fingers gripping her glass too tightly. Then, as if realizing she had been caught, she placed the glass down carefully and lowered her eyes. "I just wanted to hear your side." But the words were thin, brittle, and then I noticed it. Tucked barely inside the open flap of her handbag, the faint red light of a recording device. My chest tightened. Betrayal stung sharper than any blade. She had come not to listen, but to record, to capture my words, twist them, and deliver them to Marcus. The room felt suddenly colder. The candles flickered, casting shadows that stretched long across the table. I steadied my voice, though my hands trembled beneath the tablecloth. "Does your father know you're here?" Sophia hesitated, then whispered, "He asked me to, but I wanted to come too." Her eyes lifted, and for the briefest moment I saw it, the flicker of conflict, the hesitation, the sorrow. She wasn't proud of what she was doing. I rose from my chair, walking slowly to her side. She looked up at me, her eyes wide, a child caught between loyalty and conscience. I reached down, gently pulling the handbag closer. My fingers brushed the recorder, and I switched it off without a word. "Whatever you think you're doing," I said softly, "you don't have to follow their path. You can choose for yourself." Tears welled in her eyes, but she quickly blinked them away. "You don't understand, Aunt Olivia. He's my father. He says you'll ruin everything." I knelt beside her chair, taking her trembling hand. "I lost my son, Sophia, and now I see you walking the same path of fear he fought against. Don't let them use you." Her lips parted, but no words came. She pulled her hand back, rose abruptly, and collected her handbag. "I should go," she whispered, her voice breaking. I didn't stop her. I only watched as she hurried down the hall, her footsteps echoing off the marble until the door closed behind her. Silence fell once more, but this time it was heavier, poisoned by betrayal. I stood alone in the flickering candlelight, pressing my hands against the table to steady myself. She had betrayed me, yes, but the hesitation in her eyes, the tremor in her voice, told me she wasn't beyond reach. Deep inside, she knew the truth, and one day she might find the courage to stand for it. For now, though, the damage was done. Marcus would hear of this dinner, twist it into whatever narrative suited him, and I had lost my first attempt at an ally. I extinguished the candles one by one, whispering into the shadows. "Ethan, I tried to reach her. Maybe it isn't too late, but I can't fight this alone much longer." The house groaned as if in response, its old beams creaking under the weight of secrets. I gathered the letter, the laptop, and the brass key, clutching them to my chest. My son had left me weapons, but it was up to me to wield them. The villa felt emptier than ever after Sophia left. I could still hear the echo of her hurried footsteps fading down the marble hall, the faint click of the front door shutting behind her. That sound lingered in my chest like the closing of hope itself. I had believed, foolishly, that she might choose me over her father. Instead, she carried with her the weight of betrayal, and perhaps even the evidence that would tighten Marcus's grip around my throat. I wandered through the dimly lit corridors, every step heavy, every breath shallow. The chandeliers above me swayed slightly in the draft, scattering fractured light across the walls. The house that once felt like a fortress of secrets now seemed like a prison, and I was its lone prisoner. In the study, the laptop sat waiting on the desk. Its black screen reflected my tired face, hollow eyes staring back at me. I hesitated before pressing the power button, and when the glow returned, I found myself drawn again to Ethan's folder. My trembling fingers clicked, and another video appeared, one I hadn't dared to open before. Ethan's face filled the screen, pale and drawn, his voice lower, weaker than in the first recording. "Mom," he said, pausing to catch his breath. "If you've reached this far, it means you've seen the war room. You know about Marcus and Simon. You know about the oil. But there's something else you need to hear, something I never said to you while I lived." I leaned closer, holding my breath. His eyes softened, and for a moment he looked like the boy I raised, not the man burdened by battles. "I was afraid," he confessed, "afraid to disappoint you, afraid to drag you into the darkness I was fighting. I told you never to come here because I thought if I carried it all alone, you could stay untouched, safe. But the truth is, I was wrong. You're stronger than me, Mom. You always were. You raised me after Dad died. You worked 2 jobs, held the family together when I fell apart. You think I was protecting you, but really, I was hiding behind you. And I'm sorry." The words broke me open. Tears spilled freely, blurring the screen. I reached out, my fingers brushing the glass as though I could touch him, as though he could feel my forgiveness through the pixels. He coughed, his voice trembling now. "If you feel like giving up, don't. If they break you down, remember what you survived before. You are the only one I trust to finish this. I can't ask you to forgive me for the secrets, but I ask you to fight, not just for me, but for yourself." The video ended, leaving me staring at the empty black screen, my sobs filling the silence. I crumpled into the chair, burying my face in my hands. Betrayal from Sophia, threats from Marcus, the suffocating weight of documents and maps, all of it pressed down on me until I could barely breathe. For a fleeting moment, I wanted to give in, to sell the villa, to burn the papers, to disappear into the shadows of grief. But Ethan's voice echoed, stubborn and unyielding, even in death. "You are stronger than me, Mom." I rose slowly, my body shaking, but my spine straightening with each breath. I looked around the war room, at the evidence piled high, at the maps dotted with red ink, at the secrets my son had given his life to protect. He hadn't left them to break me. He had left them to arm me. I walked through the halls of the villa again, but this time with different eyes. The portraits that once stared down at me like strangers now felt like silent witnesses, urging me forward. The locked doors, the dusty rooms, the groaning beams. They were no longer threats. They were battlegrounds, and I was no longer a prisoner. When I reached the grand hall, I caught sight of myself in the tall mirror by the staircase. For the first time since Ethan's death, I didn't see a grieving widow. I saw a woman reborn through pain, tempered like steel in fire. The sound of footsteps drew me from my reflection. Miss Duarte appeared in the doorway, her expression uneasy. "Are you all right, Mrs. Olivia?" she asked softly. I turned to her, my voice steadier than I felt. "No, but I will be." She blinked, startled by the certainty in my tone. For a long moment she studied me, then gave a small nod. "If you decide to fight, I will help you." Her words were tentative, but they sparked a new flame in me. Perhaps loyalty could still grow in this house, even if fear had once ruled it. Perhaps Sophia, too, might one day find her courage. For now, though, it was up to me. I returned to Ethan's study, gathering the laptop, the letters, the brass key, and the most damning folders of evidence. I placed them carefully in a leather satchel and slung it over my shoulder. The weight was heavy, but it felt less like a burden and more like armor. I whispered into the silent villa, "Ethan, I hear you. I won't stop. I'll see this through, no matter what it costs me." Outside, the waves crashed violently against the cliffs, as though the sea itself roared in agreement. The night after I watched Ethan's final video, I sat in the war room surrounded by papers, maps, and contracts, the hum of the old projector still echoing in my ears. His words burned into me. He had trusted me, even when he thought I was too fragile to bear the truth. He had believed I was stronger than I ever knew, and now with Marcus circling like a hawk and Sophia caught in a storm of loyalty and guilt, I knew the time had come. I couldn't hide in shadows anymore. I needed allies. I began with Ms. Duarte. She had already revealed more than she intended, confessing Clara's bribe, admitting her silence had been bought. For days she avoided my eyes, moving quietly through the halls, always present, yet distant. That evening, I found her in the kitchen, her hands buried in soapy water, scrubbing dishes that didn't need cleaning. "Ms. Duarte," I said firmly. She stiffened but didn't turn. "You told me Clara paid you, but you didn't betray Ethan. You're still here. That means something." Her hands slowed. She finally looked at me, guilt flickering across her lined face. "I was afraid," she whispered. "We're all afraid," I replied. "But fear won't protect us now. You saw what Ethan was fighting. You saw what Marcus and Simon are capable of. If I try to face them alone, I'll lose. But if you stand with me, we can end this together." Her eyes glistened. For a moment, I thought she would refuse. Then slowly she nodded. "I owe him that much, and I owe you my truth. Yes, Mrs. Olivia, I'll stand with you." Relief washed through me, though it was only the first step. I needed someone who could do more than witness. I needed someone who could dismantle Marcus's lies. Someone with knowledge powerful enough to hold against a CEO and a lawyer. That thought brought me to Julian. The next morning, I walked the coastal road again, the satchel heavy against my shoulder, my mind replaying Ethan's maps and charts. Julian was outside his house, working on his truck again, his broad hands stained with oil. When he saw me approach, he wiped his palms on a rag and raised his eyebrows. "Mrs. Olivia," he greeted cautiously, "you look like a woman with something on her mind." I didn't waste time. "Ethan trusted you more than most. He told me you worked together. He left me files, geological surveys, charts, evidence of corruption. But I need someone who can make sense of it, someone who can confirm what it all means. Will you help me?" Julian studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he sighed. "I suspected he was hiding something like that. He mentioned oil reserves once, said he was protecting them from sharks. I didn't push, but I could tell he was carrying a fight he couldn't win alone. If he left you the files, then you're carrying that fight now." I opened the satchel and pulled out one of the folders, spreading it across the hood of his truck. Maps of the villa's foundation, charts circled in red, contracts signed by Marcus and Simon. Julian leaned over them, his brow furrowing. "This is real," he murmured. "These charts show viable reserves, deep but accessible, enough to change fortunes." He tapped the contracts with his calloused finger. "And this is fraud. If this gets out, Marcus and Simon won't just lose their claim. They'll face charges." A surge of hope rose in me, tempered with fear. "Then will you stand with me? In front of them? In front of anyone who tries to twist the truth?" Julian straightened, folding his arms across his chest. "I don't take sides lightly, Mrs. Olivia, but Ethan was my friend, and I can't watch his legacy torn apart. Yes, I'll stand with you." For the first time since I stepped into this villa, I felt the faint outline of strength forming around me. Duarte with her testimony, Julian with his expertise. I wasn't alone anymore. That night, we gathered in the dining hall. The long table that once symbolized isolation now became a council of sorts. Duarte sat across from me, her hands folded tightly, her eyes finally meeting mine with resolve. Julian spread the maps and contracts across the table, explaining them in clear terms, pointing out the fraud Marcus and Simon had committed. "This," he said, tapping one chart, "is your weapon. It's not just paper, it's the truth. If you present it, they can't deny it, not in court, not in public." Duarte's voice trembled, but she spoke firmly. "And I'll testify. I'll tell them Clara bribed me, that I saw Ethan working late nights, that he trusted no one because of what Marcus and Simon did. I'll tell them everything." I listened, my heart swelling with gratitude and fear. Gratitude that I no longer stood alone. Fear of what was still to come. Because allies meant I had something to fight with, but also something to lose. When the meeting ended, I walked them both to the door. The night air was cool, the sound of the waves crashing against the cliffs louder than usual. I looked back at the villa, its windows glowing faintly, its walls holding both my pain and my strength. I whispered into the darkness, as if Ethan were walking beside me. "I have them now, Ethan. Allies, witnesses, proof. You left me the tools, and I'll use them. I promise." The sea roared louder, as though it heard and answered, and I knew the storm was nearly upon us. The summons came faster than I expected, a formal notice delivered by courier requesting my presence at a meeting of the family board. It wasn't written in Marcus's hand, but his fingerprints were all over it. The grand gestures, the demand for control disguised as formality. I knew this was his arena, a carefully staged theater where he believed he could crush me with documents and intimidation. I dressed with care that morning, not in morning black, but in a deep navy suit Ethan had once insisted I buy for important occasions. My hands trembled as I fastened the buttons, but beneath the nerves, steel had begun to form. Duarte's testimony and Julian's expertise weighed in my satchel. Ethan's voice whispered in my memory, "You are stronger than me, Mom." The meeting was held in a glass-walled boardroom on the top floor of Marcus's corporate tower. The city stretched wide below us, skyscrapers rising like monuments to greed and ambition. I walked in alone, my heels clicking on polished marble, every eye turning toward me. Marcus sat at the head of the long table, his posture regal, his smile thin. Simon was at his right, his briefcase open, papers neatly arranged. Clara sat to the left, pearls gleaming at her throat, her expression polite but sharp as glass. "Olivia," Marcus greeted, his voice smooth, carrying the false warmth of a predator. "Thank you for joining us. We're here to resolve matters concerning the villa and the assets connected to it." I sat opposite him, placing my satchel on the table. "Ethan's will was clear. The villa belongs to me. There's nothing to resolve." Simon adjusted his glasses, his tone calm but dripping with condescension. "There is always more to resolve when family assets are in question. We have reason to believe Ethan was not of sound mind when he drafted his final instructions. His illness affected his judgment. We have documentation to support that claim." He slid a folder across the table. Inside were medical records, doctored notes, and statements from supposed doctors. My stomach turned as I scanned them. They were fabrications, cleverly constructed lies. Marcus leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. "You see, Olivia, Ethan was unstable. Brilliant at times, yes, but prone to paranoia. He created fantasies about conspiracies, enemies, hidden plots. It's tragic, really, but we can't let his delusions dictate the future of assets worth millions." Clara added softly, "We don't want to fight you, cousin. Truly. If you sign the transfer documents today, you'll be cared for. No stress, no burden. Leave the heavy matters to us." Their words pressed around me like a tightening noose. For a moment I felt the weight of the room, the high ceilings, the cold glass walls, the sharp eyes fixed on me. My palms grew damp, and a flicker of doubt crawled into my chest. They were powerful, rehearsed, united. I was just a grieving mother, standing alone against them. But then I remembered Ethan's videos, his voice steady even as his body failed. "You are the only one I trust to finish this." I straightened in my chair. "You say Ethan was delusional," I said quietly. "And yet he built a fortress of evidence against you. He documented your fraud, your embezzlement, your bribery. He didn't imagine these things. He proved them." Marcus's smile faltered, just slightly, before he recovered. "Allegations without proof mean nothing in this room. You're welcome to wave around rumors, but courts don't work on rumors." Simon leaned in, his voice low and cutting. "If you continue this charade, Olivia, you'll find yourself buried in lawsuits. You'll lose the house, the land, everything, and you'll drag Ethan's name through the mud while you do it. Is that the legacy you want for your son?" The words pierced deep. They knew where to strike. My love for Ethan, my fear of destroying his memory. My hands clenched in my lap. For a moment, doubt returned, sharp and poisonous. Clara tilted her head, her voice gentle but insincere. "We're offering you peace, Olivia. All you have to do is let go." I met her gaze, and for the briefest moment, I saw a flicker of unease. She was the weakest link, playing both sides, smiling even as her loyalty wavered. But Marcus slammed his palm on the table, his mask cracking. "Don't be foolish. You're outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and out of your depth. This isn't your world, Olivia. It never was." His voice shook slightly on the last word, and I recognized it. The fear Ethan had spoken of, the fear Marcus buried under power. He wasn't just fighting me. He was fighting the ghost of his own failures. I rose slowly from my chair, gathering the satchel, my voice calm, though my pulse thundered. "You can spin lies, forge papers, and twist his memory, but the truth doesn't disappear. I will not sign anything, and I will not surrender what Ethan entrusted to me." For a heartbeat, the room fell silent. Marcus's jaw tightened, Simon's eyes narrowed, Clara's smile wavered. They hadn't broken me. Not yet. As I turned to leave, Marcus called after me, his voice sharp, almost desperate. You think you've won something here? You've only invited war, and war is what you'll get. I paused at the door, my hand on the handle. Without turning, I said, Then war it is. The glass door shut behind me, sealing their anger inside. My legs trembled as I walked down the corridor, but my spirit was steady. I hadn't fallen. Not yet. The real battle was only beginning, and I would not face it alone. Julian and Duarte would stand with me, and perhaps, when the final reckoning came, Sophia would too. The days that followed the boardroom confrontation moved like thunderclouds rolling across a dark sky. Marcus had promised war, and I knew he would deliver. The pressure built until I could no longer breathe freely inside the villa. Papers arrived at my door, legal notices, threats disguised as formal letters. Anonymous calls came late at night, silent except for the sound of someone breathing on the other end. I didn't need to ask who sent them. Marcus and Simon were tightening the noose, convinced I would cave under their weight. But they underestimated me. They underestimated Ethan's preparation. And they underestimated the resolve grief had forged inside me. I called Julian and Duarte to the villa one last time. In the war room, we spread out the evidence across the table. Maps, contracts, photographs, and the videos Ethan had left. Julian stood tall, pointing out each fraudulent contract with the precision of a surgeon. Duarte, trembling but resolute, rehearsed her testimony aloud, vowing she would face Clara's bribes in front of everyone. When the day of the final meeting arrived, I walked into the boardroom not as a widow weighed down by sorrow, but as a woman armed with truth. Julian walked at my side, folders under his arm, his expression steady. Duarte followed, her hands clasped tightly, but her chin lifted higher than I had ever seen. Inside, Marcus already sat at the head of the table, his posture rigid, his eyes colder than the steel beams of the building. Simon adjusted his glasses, his briefcase open, papers arranged neatly as weapons. Clara sat to the left, pearls gleaming, her smile polite but brittle. And at the far end of the room, to my surprise, Sophia sat quietly, her eyes downcast. Marcus must have dragged her here as a prop, a symbol of family unity. The tension was suffocating as I took my seat. Marcus leaned forward, his voice sharp. Olivia, this farce has gone on long enough. Sign the transfer papers today, or we'll drag you through every court in this state until you're penniless and broken. I placed my satchel on the table, my hand steady. You talk of farce, Marcus, but what you've built is nothing but lies. I pulled out the first folder and slid it across the table. Ethan documented everything, your fraud, your embezzlement, your bribery. He left me the truth, and I intend to use it. Marcus's face darkened, but Simon leaned forward, his smirk unshaken. Allegations, nothing more. Without proof, this means nothing. I met his gaze, then nodded to Julian. He stepped forward, laying out the geological surveys, pointing with a firm hand. These charts confirm viable oil reserves beneath the villa's land. Ethan secured the rights legally. Marcus and Simon attempted to steal them through fraudulent contracts. I can verify the signatures, the dates, and the alterations. This isn't speculation, it's fact. A murmur rippled through the room. Clara shifted uneasily, her polished composure slipping. Marcus's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Then I turned to Duarte. Her voice trembled at first, but she pressed on. Clara bribed me to stay silent. She paid me to withhold information about Ethan's late-night work, to pretend I knew nothing. But I saw him. I saw him gathering evidence. He told me never to speak because he feared what Marcus and Simon would do. I took the money, yes, but I never betrayed him fully. And today, I won't betray him at all. Clara's face paled. She's lying, she snapped, but her voice lacked conviction. The walls of Marcus's empire began to crack, but I wasn't finished. I reached into the satchel one last time and placed Ethan's final video on the screen. His face filled the wall, pale but resolute, his voice steady despite the illness in his body. Mom, he said, if you're showing this, then it means you faced them. Marcus, Simon, Clara, You tried to bury me, but I left the truth behind. You stole, you cheated, you lied, and you thought no one would ever hold you accountable. But my mother will. She is stronger than all of you, and she will finish what I started." The silence in the room was electric. Marcus's face twisted, his mask shattering into rage. Simon fumbled with his papers, his hands suddenly unsteady. Clara looked between them, panic rising in her eyes. And then, softly, a new voice cut through the storm. "Aunt Olivia is right." All eyes turned to Sophia. She sat straighter now, her hands clasped tightly on the table, tears brimming in her eyes. "I can't do this anymore. I can't pretend my father is innocent when I know the truth. I was at that dinner. I recorded her. But when I looked at her, I saw something I never saw in you, Father. I saw honesty. I saw courage. And I realized I've been on the wrong side." Marcus's face drained of color. "Sophia," he hissed, "don't you dare." But she continued, her voice breaking. "You used me. You made me betray her. But I won't do it again. I choose her. I choose the truth." Tears filled my eyes as I watched her, redemption blooming where betrayal once stood. Clara, sensing the tide turning, pushed back from the table. "If this is how it's going, I won't go down with you." She gathered her purse, her voice sharp. "You can fight your own battles, Marcus. I'll testify to save myself if I have to." The room collapsed into chaos. Marcus slammed his fists on the table, his voice booming. "You think this ends me? You think some papers and a girl's tears can undo everything I've built?" But his fury only revealed his fear. The power he clung to so desperately slipped through his fingers as evidence, testimony, and truth stacked against him. I rose from my chair, my voice calm but unyielding. "It's over, Marcus." Ethan prepared for this moment, and so did I. "You can rage, you can threaten, but the truth is out, and the truth will destroy you." The silence that followed was final. Marcus sank back into his chair, his chest heaving, his empire crumbling around him. I gathered the evidence, the laptop, the maps, and the testimonies, tucking them back into my satchel. When I turned toward the door, Sophia stood and walked to my side, her eyes meeting mine with quiet resolve. Together we left the boardroom, the sound of Marcus's broken voice echoing behind us. For the first time, I felt not just victory, but justice. Ethan's fight was finished. The morning after the boardroom battle, the air felt lighter, as though the storm that had hovered for weeks had finally broken. For the first time in years, I woke not with the crushing weight of loss or dread, but with a sense of release. Ethan's voice no longer echoed as a burden in my chest. Instead, it lingered as a quiet reassurance. His truth was no longer hidden. It had been spoken, revealed, and defended. I stood on the villa's balcony overlooking the cliffs, the sea stretching out before me in a restless blue. The waves crashed hard against the rocks, but the sound was no longer threatening. It was cleansing, washing away the remnants of fear that Marcus and Simon had planted in me. The sun rose higher, casting golden light across the water, and I felt warmth I hadn't known since Ethan was alive. Julian came by mid-morning, his truck rumbling up the gravel path. He carried rolled maps under his arm, his face calmer than I had ever seen it. We met in the dining hall, the same table where Marcus once tried to intimidate me, now covered with coffee mugs and fresh papers. "It's done," he said, as he spread out the charts. "The contracts are verified, the reserves confirmed. With Marcus and Simon exposed, their claims won't stand in any court. The villa and everything beneath it are yours, uncontested." I exhaled slowly, the truth settling in. "Not just mine," I said quietly. "Ethan's. And now his legacy can't be twisted anymore." Julian nodded, his gaze steady. "What do you plan to do with it all?" The question lingered. I looked around the room, at the dust still lingering in the corners, at the portraits staring silently from the walls. For so long, this villa had been a fortress of secrets. Now, I wanted it to breathe. "I'll restore it," I said finally, not to flaunt wealth or power, but to make it a home, and Ethan's studio, I found his sketches, his paints, the room he set aside. I'll open it again. I'll let his spirit live here in light, not in shadows." Julian smiled faintly. "He'd like that." When he left, Ms. Duarte approached me in the hall. Her posture was straighter, her eyes no longer clouded with fear. She carried a small box, worn and faded, and held it out to me. "This was Ethan's," she said softly. "He gave it to me for safekeeping, told me to give it to you when the time was right. I think now is the time." I opened the box with trembling hands. Inside were Ethan's paintbrushes, worn from years of use, and a set of sketches, portraits of me. Some were from when I was younger, others from recent years. Each one captured something different: my laughter, my worry, my quiet strength. Tears blurred my vision as I traced the lines he had drawn. "He saw you more clearly than anyone," Duarte whispered, "even when he tried to hide it." I pressed the sketches to my chest, overwhelmed by love and grief and gratitude all at once. For the first time, I didn't feel betrayed by Ethan's secrecy. I felt honored. He had trusted me with his truth when he could no longer carry it himself. Later that afternoon, I unlocked the room Ethan had once set aside as his studio. Dust coated the tables, canvases leaned against the walls, paint sat dried and cracked in their jars. But the windows looked out over the ocean, and when I opened them, fresh air poured in, sweeping away the stale heaviness. Light filled the room, golden and soft. I placed his brushes on the table, spread his sketches across the surface, and whispered, "It's yours again, Ethan. And mine too." The villa no longer felt like a prison. It was becoming a sanctuary, a place of memory and rebirth. I walked through its halls with new purpose, imagining how each room could be restored, how laughter and warmth could once again fill its spaces. That evening, Sophia came. She stood at the gate, hesitant, her face pale, but her eyes resolute. When I opened the door, she looked at me with tears brimming. "I had to see you," she said. "After what happened in that room, I couldn't go home. Father, he isn't the man I thought he was. I don't know where I belong anymore." I studied her carefully, remembering the sting of betrayal at dinner, the red light of the recorder in her bag. But I also remembered the moment she stood in the boardroom, choosing truth over loyalty, tears falling as she spoke against her own father. "You belong where the truth is," I said gently, "and you chose it. That took more courage than you realize." Her shoulders shook as she began to cry. I pulled her into my arms, holding her tightly as though she were my own daughter. "You are not lost, Sophia," I whispered. "You are free." She clung to me, sobbing quietly, and in that embrace, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Ethan's blood lived in her too, not by birth, but by spirit, by the courage she had shown when it mattered most. As the sun set, casting the villa in shades of gold and rose, I stood once more on the balcony. The waves crashed below, steady and eternal, and I breathed deeply of the salt air. For the first time since Ethan's death, I felt not like a woman abandoned, but like a woman entrusted with his truth, his legacy, his fight. And I had won. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, restoring the house, facing the legal aftermath, helping Sophia heal. But tonight, in the glow of twilight, I allowed myself a rare gift: peace. The call came 2 days later. I was in Ethan's studio, carefully arranging his brushes in a glass jar, when the phone rang. The voice on the other end was trembling, uncharacteristically small. It was Marcus. "Olivia," he said, his tone stripped of its usual authority. "Please, meet me. Just once more. No lawyers, no boardrooms. Just us." Every instinct told me not to go. Every battle we'd fought warned me against it. Yet something in his voice, hoarse, broken, desperate, pulled me. I agreed to meet him at the villa, but only in the open courtyard, where the ocean wind carried no shadows to hide in. When he arrived, he looked nothing like the man who once sat at the head of a gleaming table, barking orders like a king. His suit was wrinkled, his hair disheveled, his eyes ringed with exhaustion. He seemed smaller, as though the weight of his downfall had carved away his stature. "Olivia," he said again, his voice rough. "I've lost everything. Simon won't return my calls. Clara has turned her back. The company board has stripped me of my seat. The press is circling like wolves. I have nothing left." I folded my arms, standing tall even as my heart pounded. "You built your empire on lies and greed, Marcus. This is the cost of your choices." He shook his head, his voice cracking. "I can live with losing my company. I can even live with disgrace, but I can't lose my daughter. Sophia, she won't even look at me. Please, Olivia, don't turn her against me completely." I drew a sharp breath. He wasn't here to ask forgiveness for himself. He was here to beg for her. "Marcus," I said slowly, "Sophia isn't a pawn. She isn't someone to be turned for or against you. She saw the truth with her own eyes. She made her choice." He took a step closer, his hands outstretched, pleading. "She's all I have left. If you shut me out, if you replace me in her heart, then I am finished. I'm begging you, Olivia, don't take her from me." I studied him carefully. For the first time, I saw not the ruthless CEO, not the cold cousin who sought to strip me bare, but a man cracked open by fear. His arrogance was gone. What remained was raw desperation. "I didn't take her from you," I replied, my voice firm but calm. "You drove her away with your choices. You made her betray her conscience, and when she couldn't bear it, she chose truth over you. That isn't my doing. That's yours." He dropped his gaze, his shoulders sagging. "Then let me see her. One last time. Just to say I'm sorry." Silence stretched between us. The ocean roared against the cliffs, steady and unforgiving. At last, I nodded. "She'll decide if she wants to see you, not me. If she chooses to hear you, it will be her choice, not yours to demand." That evening, I told Sophia about the plea. She stood by the window of Ethan's studio, the last light of sunset warming her tear-streaked face. "He wants to see me?" she whispered. "Yes," I said gently, "but it's your choice." She turned to me, her eyes conflicted. Part of me still loves him. He's my father. But another part can't forgive what he's done. I don't know if I'll ever be able to. I took her hands in mine. "You don't have to forgive him today. You don't even have to decide now. What matters is that you know you have a choice. Your voice is your own." The next day, she agreed to meet him, but only with me present. In the courtyard, Marcus waited, looking smaller still. When Sophia appeared, his eyes filled with tears. "My little girl," he whispered, "I failed you. I lied, I cheated, I dragged you into my sins. And you were braver than me, braver than I could ever be. I don't ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just ask you to remember I loved you, even if I never showed it right." Sophia's tears fell freely as she listened. She didn't rush into his arms, but neither did she turn away. "You broke me, Father," she said softly. "But maybe one day I can believe you meant those words. Today I just need space." Marcus nodded, tears streaming down his face. He didn't press further. He only bowed his head and walked away, each step heavy, each breath ragged. For once, he looked not like a man beaten by others, but a man beaten by himself. Sophia collapsed into my embrace as he disappeared through the gates. "Thank you," she whispered, "for letting me choose." I held her close, my heart breaking and healing all at once. In that moment, I realized justice wasn't about crushing an enemy completely. Sometimes justice was about giving even the broken a chance to face themselves. The storm had passed, but its aftermath left scars. Marcus would live with his, and Sophia would live with hers. As for me, I carried Ethan's truth forward, determined to honor it every day I breathed. The villa stood bathed in morning light, its white stone walls glowing softly against the endless blue of the sea. For weeks it had been a fortress of fear, betrayal, and secrets. Now it breathed differently, as though it too had survived the storm with me. The echoes of Marcus's rage, Simon's lies, and Clara's schemes no longer filled its halls. What lingered now was silence, but not the kind that suffocates. It was the silence of peace. I walked slowly through the corridors, my hand gliding over the cool marble banister of the grand staircase. Every corner carried Ethan's presence. The study where I found his laptop, the war room behind the steel door, the studio filled with sketches of me he never showed. He was gone, but in truth, he had never left. His legacy was woven into the very stones of this house, waiting for me to finally see it. Sophia joined me on the balcony that overlooked the cliffs. She had been quiet since her meeting with Marcus, carrying a heaviness in her eyes, but also a determination I hadn't seen before. She stood beside me now, the ocean wind tugging strands of her hair free. "Do you think he meant it?" she asked softly. "Your father?" I replied. She nodded. "When he said he loved me, when he begged for another chance." I looked at her, seeing the conflict in her face, the way her hands twisted together. "Love can be real even when the choices are wrong," I said. "But it doesn't erase the damage. Forgiveness is yours to give, in your own time, not his to demand." Tears welled in her eyes, but she nodded. "I want to be different from him. I don't want greed or fear to rule me. I want to build something better." I placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then you already are different, and you'll carry Ethan's legacy with me." Together we stood in silence, watching the sea crash against the rocks. The sound was no longer violent, but steady, like a heartbeat reminding us we were alive. Later that day, I unlocked the studio once more. The windows poured light into the room, illuminating Ethan's unfinished canvases, his paints, his brushes. Sophia stepped inside, her fingers grazing a sketch he had left behind. It was a drawing of the villa itself, the balcony framed by waves. Beneath it, in his handwriting, were words that made my throat tighten. "Legacy isn't money, Mom. It's truth." I whispered the words aloud, letting them fill the air. Sophia looked at me, tears glistening, and for the first time I saw not Marcus's daughter, not a girl torn between loyalties, but a young woman ready to inherit something deeper than wealth. We set about restoring the studio together. Sophia cleaned the brushes, careful with every bristle, as though touching her cousin's spirit. I opened the windows wide, letting the salty wind rush through, carrying away years of dust and silence. The villa no longer felt like a tomb of secrets. It was becoming a place of creation, of memory, of light. Julian came by in the afternoon, bringing official confirmation. The courts had reviewed the evidence. Marcus and Simon's fraud had been exposed. Clara had given testimony to protect herself, and in doing so sealed their downfall. The villa and the land beneath it were mine beyond contest. Justice had been delivered. When Julian left, Duarte approached me with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not casting me out when I confessed, for letting me stand with you in the end." "You chose truth," I said, taking her hands. "That is what matters." As evening fell, I stood once more on the balcony. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The sea stretched endless and eternal, its waves breaking like applause against the cliffs. I thought of Ethan, of the boy who once chased gulls on the beach, of the man who carried burdens too heavy alone, of the son who trusted me at last with his truth. "I did it, Ethan," I whispered into the wind. "I carried your fight. I kept your legacy, and I'll make sure it lives, not as money, not as power, but as truth." Behind me, Sophia stepped onto the balcony, her hand slipping into mine. Together we looked out at the horizon, 2 generations bound not by blood alone, but by courage, by choice, by the quiet strength to face what others feared. The villa was no longer forbidden. It was no longer a fortress of lies. It was a home. And within its walls, Ethan's spirit lived on, not as a ghost of secrets, but as a voice of truth, guiding us toward a future built not on greed, but on dignity. Thank you so much for listening. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe and tell me in the comments if you liked my story. See you in the next life story. With love and respect peacefully.